Bienvenidos a Entre Sesiones. Les recuerdo que este es un conversatorio de terapeutas y gente dedicada a la salud mental y el bienestar. En esta ocasión tengo el gusto de presentarles a Gary Bobroff, que les voy a contar un poquito de quién se trata para la gente que no está familiarizada con él. Gary es el fundador y el creador de esta plataforma que se llama Jung Online, que conecta a clientes con analistas junguianos desde 2011. También fue el desarrollador y facilitador de Arquetipos Nature, que es un sistema basado en la personalidad junguiana, orientado por el trabajo de Tony Wolff. Y es autor de un par de libros muy interesantes que les recomiendo ampliamente. El primero es Knowledge in a Nutshell, Carl Jung, y es una gran introducción para entender un poquito el pensamiento de este gran hito en la historia de la psicología, Carl Jung. El otro libro de Gary es Crop Circles, Jung and the Reemergence of the Archetype Feminine, y es un libro que también les recomiendo muchísimo. Los dos los pueden localizar fácilmente en Amazon. Gary tiene una maestría en psicología y le doy la bienvenida. Me da muchísimo gusto tenerte entre sesiones. Welcome, Gary.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you.
Okay, let's begin. I would like to start by establishing what are we talking about when we talk about analytical psychology, the Jungian theory. What's that?
So this is the school of psychology that was started by Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychological pioneer. He was born in 1875 and he died in 1961. And he was the heir apparent of Freud. And at the sort of birth of our understanding of the unconscious. And they eventually had a falling out, and you have these different branches of psychology that have come from Freud and Jung. And Jung is a huge influence on the 20th and now the 21st century. So much of our psychological language comes from Jung. The terms introvert and extrovert are from Jung. The way we talk about dreams, the way we do. The word complex comes from Jung. So all of that, the way we use the term archetype, the word synchronicity is a word that Jung coined. So much of our language, you know, whether it's a psychology world or kind of the new age personal growth world, so much of how we talk about the inner life today comes from Carl Jung.
What are the main differences between a Jungian analyst and a psychotherapist based on Freud? When a client or a patient looks for therapy, what would be the main differences between these two approaches?
Yeah, well, I mean, they can be very similar or they could be very different. In general, one of the biggest things that makes a difference between a regular psychotherapist and a Jungian analyst is that a Jungian analyst has to do a tremendous amount of inner work, a tremendous amount of analysis on themselves as a client. So even before someone starts to do the training to become an analyst, they have to do 100 hours of analysis with a Jungian analyst before they even begin. And then there's another 300 to 400 hours of personal analysis. So in addition to all the training, which is, you know, pretty similar between a Jungian analytical, the educational training is pretty similar to a PhD in clinical psychology or, you know, a master's, depending on, you know, where you are, what programs. But they're pretty similar. But the difference is the emphasis on doing your own work. Now, that doesn't mean that every single analyst has, you know, worked all their stuff out, but it does mean that most of them have spent a lot of time wrestling with their own unconscious. And you know, you can have a PhD in, you can be a psychiatrist or a PhD clinical psychologist and have never, ever done any personal work. There are people that have PhDs in clinical psychology and psychiatrists who have never been a client of psychotherapy. You know, so this is possible. So there can be a very big difference between them.
One of the main concepts in Jungian theory is the collective unconsciousness. That's basic in the map of the Jung psyche. What does it mean and what the archetypes are?
The collective unconscious refers to Jung's observation that beyond the personal unconscious, beyond our dreams that have to do with ourselves, beyond the way a complex inside us, something that's difficult or a kind of a split inside us, beyond the ways in which those things are personal and reflect our own day-to-day experience, our own history, that there's actually a deeper level in which we participate in a larger field of the unconscious that is something that goes all the way back to the very roots of our species and that is universal amongst all human beings, all times and all cultures, that there's a way that we have the imprints and the different energies, these bigger, deeper structures in the unconscious that affect everybody and that everyone is dealing with to some degree or less or more. So the archetypes are those kind of like the structures, the organs of the collective unconscious, that there's a way in which every human being is either identified with the warrior or opposed to the warrior. All these different energies in us, the wise old man or the king, the father, the mother, all the stories that you hear in mythology all reflect these kind of gods, in the sort of Greek or the different indigenous cultures all around the world have the mythological gods. Those are really good images of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And so these energies are alive in all of us, and there's something about the collective unconscious that's important to understand as well, which is that there's a big kind of, Jung doesn't think that our psychological experience is just from the brain, that there's a field that transcends time and space. And so there's a way that the psyche takes us back in connection to our ancestors. I know that's a piece that your audience will understand very well, that there's a way we don't know what the collective unconscious is. We don't know where it ends. Does it have to do with the ancestors? Maybe, but there's a way that the field is much bigger and that we're like a little flower that blooms out of the rhizome of that field. So.
And last time we talked, I told you I used to work in media, particularly in radio, and I found in your book that you shared the same passion for music. So let's talk about some archetypes and let's have a soundtrack for the people who are watching this program. And let's start with the concept of persona, the mask. And let me share you this part of a song by the Rolling Stones, The Mask. It becomes hard to face, it becomes hard to see the face that sees you without flinching, the face that you put on when you are all by yourself. I wear a mask. What does the archetype persona stands for?
Yes, sure. So the persona comes from the ancient Greek theater actors would have a mask. And the mask would be their persona and it would have a particular character on the mask. So Jung uses the term persona to refer to the mask that we wear in adaptation to society. The ways that we put on a bit of a false front, or that we present ourselves in a certain way to the audience. I read a quote from Marlon Brando the other day. He said, more or less, he said, we're all actors. Anytime we want to get something or we want to hide something, we're an actor. Many people are acting all day long. That's from Marlon Brando. And, I think it's the same with the persona. There are some people that are really in that persona, that mask of orientation. What will others think of me? Acting to suit what others will think of me. Some people are doing that all day long. Some people are doing it very little. Some people probably need more persona. There's a sort of a street word in American English called fronting. You got to front, you got to put up more of a face. And some people don't front enough. They're too vulnerable, too open. So we need to have some kind of a vehicle to keep society a bit at a distance, or to present ourselves in a certain way. And like I said, some people may need a bit more persona. Some people need to start to take that off and listen more inside. So it's a part of the human experience, is having a persona.
Let's see some concepts about the very Jung hand. Persona comes from Latin mask, the mask worn by the ego, the way how we present ourselves to others. Let me ask you about the persona. What would be the benefits and challenges of the persona archetype?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, the benefit is that it gives you, and where everybody's doing some extent of persona, most people anyway. There's a way that we're constructing an image of how we want others to see us, and working to keep that in place with the various things we show or we don't show. Now, the problem can be that there are people who are just very identified with the persona, very concerned with how others see them, and very, very much concerned with the outer appearance and less with the inner life. And Jung really felt that there was so much danger in not connecting to the inner life and sort of seeing ourselves only as the persona. And so many people, live just to be seen a certain way, to have a certain way that they appear in the culture and in their community, and they're very invested in that. And so those people often are not particularly oriented towards the inner world, and they may, there's all kinds of problems that can come from that, of course, but in general, it's a splitting off between the outer and the inner. Now, we could, as I said a minute ago, there could be people that don't have enough persona, that they're too vulnerable to the world, that they need that bit of a shield in the mask of the persona to in order to succeed in the business world or in the community. You can't just be completely transparent all the time. For business reasons, a lot of people want to see you a certain way.
There is this other archetype, which is the counterpart of the persona, the shadow. And let's hear some John Mitchell's songs, Shadows and Light. She wrote, every picture has its shadows and it has some source of light, blindness, and sight. So when we talk about the shadow, what's behind the picture of the persona? What is in our shadow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so sometimes we talk about the shadow is in opposition to the persona. So whereas the persona is everything that how we want people to see us, the shadow is all of the qualities that are the opposite of that, of our worst self, the values that are the most removed, the most opposite to the persona, the qualities in ourselves that we, the opposite values to our conscious daylight values. So the part of us that, if we're very nice, there might be in shadow, there might be some meanness, there might be some aggression down in the shadow. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But as Joni said in that quote, there's a quality of blindness in us. So, one of the biggest things about the unconscious is that, as Jung said, and all the Jungian, the Marion Woodman, different Jungians say, the unconscious really is unconscious. There's things about ourselves that we don't get. When a particular complex has us, one of these split off energies inside us, we don't know why it has us. We're caught and we can't break out of it. The shadow is a part of us that's deeply unconscious. So, even if it pops up, we might say, oh, I don't know what came over me. Or I don't know why I did that. Or I don't know why I acted that way. And people very often immediately deny, oh, that didn't really happen. Or, sometimes people will, especially I think, when they're not very conscious, either young or for whatever reasons, they'll do something bad and then they'll just completely almost wipe it out of their memory. Like that didn't really happen. Or what did I do? You'll see a kid say, after they do something and you catch them, they'll say, what did I do? As if they don't know. No. So, the shadow is that energy that we want to say, we're pretending it isn't there. And oftentimes we don't know it's there. And, there's an analyst on the Jungian online group that I run who gives a great example in the book about, the shadow is all of those rejected values in myself. And I'm never going to integrate that. I'm never going to fully make the shadow part of who I am, but I can learn to see that it's there and accept it.
Let's see what Jung says about it. The shadow is the dark side of our nature and often appears in dreams as dark, usually rather negative figures. Here I have a doubt. In our shadow, there are only negative things, or do I have something to learn about my shadow?
No, I think they can be positive. I mean, they're often a negative figure in dreams, but negative can be a subjective word. What's negative to one person might be positive to somebody else, and a lot of different qualities. So there certainly can be qualities that we need to redeem in order to be more whole, more complete, more full human being and live a more full life. A lot of people, there's so many splits in different kinds of people, but a lot of people, if you're the nice guy, the nice woman, you may have split off your aggression and not have the strength to say no, or not have the strength to say, I want this, I don't want that. So if you're overly nice, right, you might have pushed that aggressive piece down there, and your struggle might be to come to bring that energy back into you, and you might need to connect that to become healthy and a stronger, fuller, more real person. Now, there are people that are just the opposite. They're very aggressive, and they need the shadow is their softness, their vulnerability. And you do see a lot of people who are very aggressive, really putting down people that are in touch with any kind of inner vulnerability or feelings or emotion. So this can be very different for different kinds of people, but there's all kinds of qualities that can need to be redeemed and brought into awareness. The classic example that I talk about in the book is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So Dr. Jekyll is this, philanthropist, doctor, do-gooder, helps everyone. Mr. does everything, the right way. And then Mr. Hyde comes out, and Mr. Hyde, he wants what he wants, and he wants it now. And you better give it to him. He'll intimidate, he'll bully, he'll be violent, but he's connected to instinct and what he wants. And so, and that of course, that book came to Robert Louis Stevenson in a dream. And so it really does encapsulate, for all this persona of Mr. Good Guy, there's that shadow there that wants what it wants. And, if you want to think about different countries with this, I think, America, thinks it's always wearing the white hat. Maybe not, huh? Maybe not.
Okay. Let's talk about another archetype, and let's see the playlist I am proposing to you. John Lennon, woman, the archetype of the anima. Mm-hmm. Woman, I know you understand the little child inside the man. Please remember my life is in your hands. And woman, hold me close to your heart. However distant, don't keep us apart. After all, it is written in the stars. So help me understand, how is it possible that I, as a man, have a female energy in myself?
Yeah, so this is very interesting, and it's something that Jungians see over and over and over and over and over and over in the dreams, that we have inside us an opposite. So you see the opposite with the persona and the shadow, and you see the opposite also here with what Jung calls the anima. So the anima or the animus is the inner opposite again. So one of the things that's really interesting about this inner figure is that, it's the opposite personality type, or in the system I teach, it's often the opposite archetype as well. So if I'm an introvert, my anima is an extrovert. If I'm a feeler, my anima is a thinker. And so when you see this in dreams, you see the figure acting that way. The anima, like the shadow, can hold some of these opposite characteristics, and we might find ourselves attracted to the opposite because there's this split off inner in us, and then we project it onto people that fit the image, and we become very attracted. But very often that's a part of ourselves that we want to, over the course of a lifetime, come to understand and know and integrate. But in the earlier part of life, very often, we'll find that the people that we're super attracted to and have that love at first sight or a strong romantic projection on, very often are opposite type to us as well. And this inner figure, is serving to lead us deeper and deeper into the unconscious, and to learn more about the unconscious, but also ourselves, and generally a figure that's trying to take us into a cycle of growth. Now, that could be very painful because, if you're attracted to someone strongly, but they're your opposite, how likely is that to work out?
Sure.
So there's the pain, and the anima can take us into that pain and into the experience of pain. But there can be a process that's ultimately, wisdom bringing out of that.
Let's take a look to Jung. The anima is not a specific woman, but an archetype. She contains all the ancestral impressions of what it means to be female. Her form depends on a man's individual knowledge of women. So, what can I learn from this female energy in every man's soul? How can I connect it and develop it for my own good? And I'm speaking standing in 2020, where we can find these societies very male-oriented, with these governments we are suffering around the world with these figures with a male energy, not so right embodied. So what can I learn from this female energy as a man?
Sure. Well, I think, for me, my first book was really on the archetypal feminine in the world. And I think if you look at our world today, there is a kind of abusive father figure, male energy that is, destroying the planet, taking everything for itself and giving nothing to everybody else, lying about doing that. You have kind of these female figures, like, I think one of the key conflict of our time, you can sum it up as the abusive father and the truth-telling daughter. And the truth-telling daughter, like Greta Thunberg, talking about the environment and the fact that we're destroying the planet for just so we don't inconvenience some rich people, basically. There's this feminine energy that's coming up in the world that is speaking of our connection to a planet that is finite. That is, and you also see, political figures like AOC in the United States or Arden in New Zealand that are younger women that are saying, hey, we need to do things differently, and we need to honor the planet. We need to take care of the most vulnerable. We need to take care of our bodies and ourselves and our feelings. And, this abusive father figure, often in response to these truth-telling daughter figures, will say very condescending things like, oh, you seem very upset. Maybe you should just calm down for a while. So there's this patriarchal energy. And I think the conflict of our time is the conflict of the end, where I believe we're at the end of the zeitgeist of this overly masculine, power-oriented, technology-loving, money-loving energy, and that this feminine energy that's more connected to the earth, more connected to the body, more connected to feeling, less infatuated with power, and that is in some ways the conflict of our time. Now, the anima inside myself, very different for all kinds of people. You know, your anima can look very different. Typically, we associate the anima in men with getting in touch with your feelings, sitting beyond just, you know, it's easy to be identified with our feelings. It's easy to feel pain. It's easy to feel, you know, disappointment or negative feelings or whatever. It's harder to sit with that long enough that you can start to unfold, well, what is this feeling really telling me? What is this really about? Is there something beneath that? And very often the anima is trying to lead us into the deeper piece beyond that, but we've got to move beyond just having our feelings into looking at them, sitting with them, listening, dialoguing. That's just what Jung did. When you look at the Red Book or other things, what Jung did was actually talk to these energies inside him and say, what are you telling me, this negative feeling I'm having? What's your message for me? So that's how we get to the anima.
You made me remember some rules I heard as a boy, and maybe you heard them also. Boys don't cry, don't show
Right.
feelings, and I think
Yes.
these beliefs have caused more damage than good for the men.
Yes, and I think we're outgrowing that, but we're in the middle of the conflict. You know, we're in the middle of a new, I mean, Jung said our time was the time of kairos, of the changing gods, you know, that the forces inside the whole human collective are changing. It's what's called an axial time, a time when the gods are changing, the primary zeitgeist, the spirit of the times is changing. And so, you know, we're in the middle of that, and we're in the conflict of that, and we're seeing the stakes are very high. But people on both sides are, you know, politically, the change is going on, and inside all of us.
The opposite of the anima, the animus. Let's see some song of Laura Cohen. I'm your man. If you want a boxer, I will step into the ring for you. And if you want a doctor, I'll examine every inch of you. If you want a driver, climb inside. Or if you want to take me for a ride, you know you can. I am your man. So the animus is this energy, this masculine energy in women. What's the message of this male energy inside a woman's soul?
Well, it's really for every woman to answer that for herself. But if you talk to you know, women Jungian analysts, they do talk about the sort of negative side of a masculine that we see in the world can be in women sometimes. And it's typically, and it doesn't have to be this way, you could mix up the genders, and there's lots of different ways to talk about it, and you know, what's it like for people with different identifications and all that. But in general, you know, we think of the anima in connection to feeling, and the animus in connection to what we call thinking or judgments or opinions. And so a typical manifestation of it would be a kind of an obstinate, opinionated view that somehow doesn't quite fit the situation and somehow is missing a part, but is quite rigid. The way you might think of a man who is got an anima complex is a bit lost in negative feeling. There's a way to be lost in negative thinking or negative judgments or opinions. So, you know, that's, you know, a certain rigidity in thinking. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that if you talk to, you know, women analysts, they'll tell you that.
Okay. So let's see what are the words of Jung about this. The animus represents the thinking, logical part of a woman's psyche and can lead her towards knowledge and true meaning. It's made of spontaneous, unpremeditated opinions which can affect a woman's emotional life. So how can the male energy be at the service of a woman?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think it's the same way as the anima is for a man, in that, you know, it's leading us into the deeper questions. That, you know, you can say that the anima is leading you know, men towards reconciling with the bigger questions of love and eros and feeling, and taking them into the world and wrestling with those things in the same way that the animus is leading women to wrestle with big questions and big ideas and logos, in the largest sense, in the wrestling with those questions of what is the world in its objective, principled sense, what's that about? And wrestling with these questions, whether it's in a feeling way or in a thinking way, can take us more deeply on the journey of life.
In this lack of balance between the masculine and the feminine energy, do you find that maybe women are going to the very, very opposite in some expressions of these feminist movements? And maybe it's necessary. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think everybody's journey is their own, and I don't want to judge people too much, but I think that it's you'll see it commonly discussed in culture these days, around, is there a sort of, going too far into the masculine in certain ways. And I think you could say that's true in some ways. And, you'd have to think about what that is, in the particular experience of your own life. There's good books on this. I think it's a danger in the culture, for example, that, it's certainly encouraged in lots of ways for women to be more like men in the world of work, in the world of career. And there's a rewarding for taking on the masculine value system. And so, it's, I think, a common experience that women, kind of rush to the top and taking on a masculine persona to get there. And what I think is exciting, and we see with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the States, or Janica Ardern in New Zealand, or again, Greta Thunberg, is the beginning of bringing what I would say are feminine values into the world. So what does that mean to me? That means every individual person matters, not just the powerful. It's love versus power. And so bringing the values of, the body matters, and feeling matters, and the earth matters, and bringing those feminine values into the world, I think, is very important. Of course, the danger in our culture is for all of us to get lost in the masculine, men and women. So there's a tremendous risk there. And the thing that people, I don't think, understand, to really return to your specific question, is that women and men can be serving the sort of energy of dominance, even through a politically correct argument, or through they think they're very left wing, but they're actually bringing a kind of a power trip masculine value underneath the politically correct, argument they're making. So, you certainly can see an unconscious masculine value. And I think there's an issue, it's very easy, I think, depending on what circle you're in, it's generally easy to be critiquing men and the masculine. I think if anybody wants to talk about the shadow of the feminine, or the shadow of women, or the shadow of any what could be called a victim group these days, if you say anything about that, right, you get immediately attacked. You get cancel cultured for that. And I think that's part of the shadow there, is that there's an unwillingness often to face the shadow of their own group. It's very easy to attack the dominant group, but not willing to accept critique about their own group. And I think that's part of that masculine energy in the world.
Let's go to one of my favorites, both the Beatles and the ego. And the Beatles, this song, I'm in Mine, I love it. That's the sound I hear when I fell in the trap or in the judgments of my own ego. All I can hear, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. This is the soundtrack for my ego, and I hear it all the time when I get into trouble. So what's the ego? What's that voice?
Well, there's different meanings to this, you see. So, I mean, in the Jungian psychological world, in general, the ego is not a negative term, and I think it's important for people, certainly coming from a Buddhist point of view or maybe a New Age point of view, to understand that psychologically, some people don't have enough ego. They don't have a healthy ego. They haven't got enough. Um, a sort of a boundary around them and enough strength and enough cohesiveness to make healthy choices, to stand up for themselves, to get what they want in life. There's not enough of that sort of central power energy to be even healthy. So the ego isn't necessarily a negative word in the Jungian world. But I think the part that they're talking about there with the I, me, mine, they're starting to talk about a power complex. They're starting to talk about somebody who maybe is in denial of their own egotism, which again, egotism refers to a bit of a power complex, that I want what I want and I'm not willing to see the shadow of that. I'm just saying, well, this, I'm not being mean. I'm just standing, I'm just going after what I want. So people can have a power complex. And I think that's what the Beatles are talking about there. Great images, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's see what Jung says about the ego. The ego is the center of consciousness and gives us our sense of who we think we are. It organizes and balances the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche, giving it a sense of personal identity and purpose. So as you were speaking, it's not a negative concept at all in the Jungian theory. What would be the benefits and challenges presented by the ego in our development? I understand there are two stages in human development in the Jungian theory. In the first part, the challenge is to build a strong ego. So what are these benefits and challenges to build a strong ego?
Yeah, the classic map that you're referring to there is in the first half of life. That there's a quest to build up our sense of self, to find out our power, what we can do in the world, how we can be successful, how we can get things done, how we can go and do. And there's a bringing together, solidly establishing an ego and a sense of ourselves and who we are and what we're about. Jung classically talks about the second half of life, a bit letting go of the ego, letting other parts of the consciousness come in. So less focus on, the day-to-day and what I need and power and where I'm going, and more on, what's coming up in my dreams? Why am I doing that weird thing? Why do I have that complex? It's like the sun, right? Like the ego can be the sun, and you have to kind of dim it a little bit to see the moon, right? At night, the sun's gone, but we see the moon and the stars. So when the ego gets a little smaller, right, you can start to see these other parts and connect with them. Now, not everybody is doing it that way. Most people are, but there are people that still in the second half of life still need to develop that strength in that ego. And in Jungian analysis, there's classically defined, there's two stages or two parts. One is reinforcing the client's ego, keeping their self together so that they can face the shadow in these other pieces. And then, and the second part is doing the work with the unconscious. So the Jungian world really understands that, throughout the process, you need to keep the person together, right? You don't want them to split apart. And we're trying to bring complexes that are split off energies back into connection. So, you don't want to have the ego fall apart and then it's just the complex, right? So
let's talk about the self, and let me show you. In ancient Mayan cultures here in Mexico, there are this way of people saying hi each other. One says in la quech, and the other one says jalaquén. The meaning is I am other you, and the other says you are other me. This thing I find it quite good, with a high resemblance of the Namaste greeting for yoga. So let me share you. I repeated Beatles because they are of my favorites. And even if this song is just a joke, but the words, the lyrics, I love them. I am he as you are me, and we are all together. So speaking about the self, what is this wholeness of the self?
Yeah, so the Jung observed in his patients, but also in the traditions of the world and in the mystic reflections of the world, that there is an energy bigger than the ego, bigger than the shadow, bigger than the anima, an energy holding the whole thing together. And that, he talked about, you're going through your life and all these things are happening. And at the end of life, you see sort of how it was all a pattern, all arranged, that there's a certain way that the self is holding the story together, the greater container that's holding, the ego and the shadow, and trying to make sure that the ego has enough strength to be able to integrate some shadow, but not letting us see too much shadow too soon that we're overwhelmed by it. There's a force kind of holding the whole thing together and trying to keep it in balance, keep it healthy, keep it integrating, but ground and round, slowly, not too much. So there's this force in us that wants our healthy growth. And that is a slow process. It's holding the shadow and the ego and all these different parts of us together. And that's what Jung called the self.
The self, let's see. The self is the wholeness that the psyche is constantly seeking and moving towards. The self transcends the ego and is the goal of the individuation process, as you mentioned. Is there really a space in the Jungian theory for a connection with a superior self, with a superior unit? Maybe you have read this fight among Freud and Jung, where Freud criticizes that Jung put some kind of God in the center of his theory, and Jung answering, if I were to put something in the middle, it would be better a God than the sex. So,
yes.
How can we find this idea of a soul or a high energy or a oneness or a superior self that we are all connected to?
Yes, certainly. I mean, that's the big difference with Freud and Jung, right? Is Freud believes that all neurosis, all creativity, all religiosity is repressed sexual drive, more or less. I mean, that's basically Freudian theory. And Jung says that's no. He doesn't see that. He understands that the instinctual part of us is part, but the archetypal and the drive towards something spiritual and a bigger process lies at the center. So Jung saw the self energy as working in reality. I mean, Jung, to me personally, I don't see Jung as making up theory in the way that I see Freud doing. I see Jung as a sort of a psychological archaeologist, that he's looking at what is actually going on in himself and in his dreams. And he did that in a much deeper way, I believe, than Freud did. He really let himself go into the unconscious in a way that Freud did not. And that in there, that there is something holding it all together. And of course, we see this in the religious iconography and the drive. I mean, most cultures on the planet have a place for the gods, so this is part of human nature. And Jung says that this is in the psyche. This is a part of who we are. There's the self. So I mean, I personally agree with Jung, and I think he's right.
I love to see the images of some recordings. It's a shame there are so few, but there is one where someone asks Jung, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "No, I know God." And I love that answer.
Yes. Yeah. And it just shows you how close he was to the mystery. He wasn't, he wasn't, again, like I just said, I don't think it's about making up theory. I think he's talking about what he experienced.
So the whole point maybe it's to transcend, to fulfill this journey as a man or as a woman. And the individual, this symbol, I love it, the Tao, or related to the individuation process. How can you explain the goal of a man or a woman in life towards transcendence?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's integrating, it's wholeness in the Jungian world. So not necessarily transcendence, but bringing these pieces together over time and being curious. Well, why do I feel this way? Why do I act that way? What is it about me that makes me do this? Why do I do that? Why do, you know, and getting curious about what's going on inside us. And that individuation process can also be about the world. You know, it can also be about learning to be more assertive, learning to be more in the world for some people. So many different directions we can go, but the self is holding that process together and enabling us to go forward with it. And you know what the Jungian process is to look at dreams, to look at what's really going on in our real lives, our real dilemmas, our real problems, our real relationships, our real feeling states, our issues, but also what is the unconscious telling us? And what the Jungians feel is that if we look to the unconscious, it's going to point the direction that the individuation process wants to go. You know, I was talking with someone about this very recently, and they're saying, well, if I have a dream of doing this thing, does that mean I'm supposed to do it, or does it mean I'm not supposed to do it? I said, well, you have to, you know, you have to interpret it and look at it. And I think very often we'll see dreams saying, hey, you need to do that. You need to, there's a healthy need that you are not meeting, and you need to go and meet it, whether that's, maybe that's, you know, sex, maybe that's money, maybe that's art, but, you know, it might be leading you in 100 different directions, but it might be saying, this is what you need to do. Now, it may also be very explicitly saying, no, you need to not do that. And it will show you, it'll characterize it in the dreams. And very often you'll see themes in dreams over time that will say, hey, look, go there. You need to do that.
There are many roads in this individuation process. I have found as a real precious finding in my life this feeling of love. So I would like to end this beautiful talk with you about love. So if we talk about love, what are we talking about? I would like to know your experience, from what you find in your patients, in your clients, in your life. What is love in your experience?
Well, in the Jungian world, you know, we talk about love often in connection with eros, and it's not just a sexual eros, it's eros of just feeling, of liking someone, of caring for someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be romantic or sexual. It can be just that feeling of, I care about this person. You know, I think often therapists and clients genuinely care. We have an eros with each other. And that's a beautiful thing. And it sustains us and provides the energy. It provides, you know, a client that has some eros for the analyst or therapist, you know, probably shows up on time and does the work. And a therapist that has eros for a client, you know, is involved and cares and fights and says, oh, you know, really is passionate. And Jung brought his whole self to a client. It doesn't always mean advice giving, but it means being fully your whole humanity, not doing the thing of the power trip. And Jung says, you know, love and power are the opposite. And power is about wanting to control someone else. And so when you love someone, you don't have that need to control them. And some people are very controlling in this world. Some people have a big control shadow, a big power complex that they don't want to see or admit. And so that power and love are very opposite. And for me, you know, love is a love without wanting to control. It's about just wanting good things to happen for that person, wanting their life to be good. You know, and that eros of feeling of a real relatedness to them. And I mean, even in the therapy world, right, there are therapists who are on a power trip, that they want to be up here and the client's down there, and you know, come in my office and you sit there and I sit here and I'm very quiet, and then I'll, you know, and it can be, I'm not a big fan of that. I don't like therapists that are on a power trip. It's not the kind of people I want to work with. So, I think we have to be aware of that reality, that there's power in conflict with love and eros. And I think, eros is a big mystery. Love is a big mystery. One of the things that I always tell people about synchronicities is, if you look at a synchronicity, people want to go into a meaning. They want to go into, what is this for me? Is this gonna, if I have a romantic synchronicity, does this mean that this relationship's going to work out and be good? And it doesn't always mean that. I have an article people can find about romantic love and synchronicity on my website. You can find that. But if you look at feeling, very often in synchronicity, there's a feeling piece going on. So, you break up with somebody and you run into them all over town, or there's some kind of romantic past in the synchronicity, or there's a caring, a loving, a feeling. And so when we see that over and over, the world and reality is reorganizing events to make a synchronicity happen, for us to see a reflection of an inner state and an outer event in that moment. Why is it that feeling matters? And we start to realize, Jung said that a world is, in a way, it's about cosmogonic love, that there's, the whole planet is, in a way, reflects a feeling and eros and relatedness. And that is like the antidote, the opposite of the world that we live in, which is focused on power and doesn't believe in any spirituality or anything. We're all just robots and all this nonsense. There's an illness in our society about power and the masculine, and a bunch of illusions about technology, and we're driving our planet over the cliff because we love all that masculine power, technology, energy, and we don't care about human beings and the heart and feeling. And so in synchronicity, we start to see that there's something going on. Well, how can the outer events in the world be rearranged because of how I feel? And that's not a power trip. It's like the Tao, it's like the I Ching. There's something about the inner and the outer that reflects each other in an authentic and a real and genuine way. But it's not about controlling. It's not about trying to make things happen. It's just saying, if you really feel this way, something happens in the world.
Good. Before we say goodbye, I noticed that you also work in conferences, books, and workshops. You have this workshop called Archetype and the Five Buddha Families. What is this about, and when is it going to be, and how can people interested register for this workshop?
Sure, thank you.
The name is very, very provocative.
Thank you.
The Archetype and the Five Buddha Families. Let me tell you, I find it very, very attractive, because it's the way the very Jung worked. This attraction between a deeper psychology, between the knowledge of the East and the West. And I would love to see how you make this mix between Jung and the Buddhism.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't make the mix. The mix is, I just found that the mix is there. So I come from, the main teaching that I bring in the Jungian world comes from Toni Wolff, who was Jung's close companion. And she, after the Jung wrote Psychological Types in 1921, and she was right there with him when that came out. And there's a lot of Toni Wolff in Psychological Types. In fact, the reason that we have the intuitive category is probably Toni Wolff. But after it came out, she felt something's missing. And so she posited that there's 4 archetypes, and she wrote about them for women and called them the structural forms of the psyche for women. And what's very interesting is that the 4 forms that she described parallel the Buddha families. And I don't think she knew about them. I think this is just somebody really gets something right about personality. And so we have these 2 systems, one from Switzerland, one from Tibet, that say that there's different kinds of people, and that people tend to be this way or they tend to be that way. And there's big things, some people are identified with the warrior, including a lot of women. And they have these 4 different archetypes or structural forms or Buddha families. And they're so close. And I've been teaching that material for a very long time. And it came from Tony Wolff to my teachers, to my teachers' teachers, my teachers, and then to me. And I've been teaching it for a long time, and I didn't really look. People kept saying, you should look at the Buddha families. And I was like, okay. And I looked at the Buddha families, and I'm so struck by how similar it is. You know, Tony's talking about the Amazon and the warrior, and in Buddha families, they talk about karma family and the action and the doers. And so it's pretty clear that these 2 different groups that are interested in the collective unconscious and the deep structures of personality find these 4 different ways to define people. And I think it's very true material. And you can find the introductory video on the Archetypal Nature page, archetypalnature.com. You know, perhaps I'll come down there and do a workshop someday for your folks down there on the material. But I am doing a webinar starting in January, 2 times a week. But you know, check archetypalnature.com, and I'm probably going to change the name of that work to Personality Tribes. I do have the domain name for that, so I think it'll probably be rebranded that way pretty soon. But that's a big part of the work I do, is just saying, hey, that there's some different ways that people understand themselves and act in the world, and that's what Archetype and the 5 Buddha families is all about.
Okay, can you share your social media, mail, web, or any form people can contact you?
Sure. So if you want to work with a Jungian analyst via video, I have Jungian Online, which I've run now for almost 10 years, connecting people with Jungian therapists and analysts. So if you want to work with an analyst, check out junguianoonline.com. And you can usually see most of what I'm doing is there as well. But I also have gsbobroff.com, which is my name, GSBOBROFF.com. And that has all my writing and interviews, and you know, this will be there. And so all the different articles and books and interviews are all at gsbobroff.com. And for the archetype work, it's Archetypal Nature. It probably will become Personality Tribes in the future. That's pretty much it. I also have Jung Archademy, JUNGARCHADEMY, jungarchademy.com. And that's like a sister to Jungian Online, and just where we do a lot of our teaching and courses go through there. That's still a new site. We're still building that up, but that's going on as well. And, you know, you can get a hold of me through those sites as well. And thank you for having me. This has been a fun talk. I think it's beautiful what you're doing.
Gary, I really thank you. You are a very generous man, and I love to talk to you. I hope to see you soon next year. And for sure, we're going to make some work to bring your workshops in Mexico. So
okay.
I really appreciate your generosity.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jorge. It's been beautiful to talk to you. Thank you.